Hello students, welcome to your first video lecture for the semester. A little bit of information as to how to use these lectures. I recommend that before you look at the lectures, you download your guided notes, which if you recall are your major assignment for each module. And the guided notes are split up into sections. And these sections correspond also to each video lecture. So for example, if you were to open up your guided notes now, you would see guided notes module 1, chapter 1, biology, study of life. And under chapter 1.1, it tells you what you should be doing to answer these questions. So it says, watch animation, characteristic of life. This is an animation produced by the textbook that I have on Blackboard under module 1. And then watch my video lecture, which is this, what is biology? And read chapter 1, and notice I give you specific page numbers that correspond to these questions and what you need to know, 2 through 6. So if you have this open while you're watching this lecture, you should be able to answer these questions 1 through 5 under 1.1, which is in this video lecture, what is biology? The textbook, which if you didn't purchase, you can just use the online version. In pages 2.6, you will also find this content to support anything that you didn't quite understand or you need more information on from the video lecture. Okay, so let's start now with biology. What is biology? So bio comes from the root word bio, B-I-O, means life. And logy, so biology. Logy is the suffix used to designate the study of. So bio, life, logy, the study of. So for example, cardiology. Your cardiac system is your heart, your respiratory. So cardiology is the study of your circulatory system. Technology. Tech is like the application of science. So technology is the study of the application of science. Archaeology is human history, the study of the human history. Those are all examples. All right, so from there, let's go on to talk about living things, and we're gonna discuss what are the main characteristics of living things. How can you give characteristics of something that's living versus something that's not? What are those, do those living things have in common? And all living things share these 7 characteristics that we're going to discuss, despite what types of living things there are. And living things, right, they have a lot of diversity. Here are some pictures that represent the diversity of living things. Here we have bacteria, which are one of the most ancient forms of life. Single-celled prokaryotic cells. Their whole organism is just one cell. And from there we have a picture of a single-celled paramecium, which is a type of protist that we're going to talk about later in the semester. Here's you may think of it as just a mushroom, but it's from the kingdom fungi, which is a multicellular eukaryotic organism. Here we have a flowering plant, and then we have an animal here. All right, so despite all of this diversity we see in life, they all share some common characteristics that we're going to go through now. They're all organized, all right? Life has organization to it, and it follows these levels of organization. And so at the smallest level, at the most basic level, we have that all of life consists of matter, and there it consists of atoms. Later on in this unit, we're going to talk about the different elements that make up living things, which are mostly carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. So these atoms come together, and they come together to form molecules. So when we join these atoms and we join them in covalent bonds that we'll talk about, we form molecules. And then molecules come together to form cells. And this is a question in your guided notes. The cell is the basic unit of structure and function of all living things, whether it's a unicellular or single-celled organism or a multicellular organism. Cells perform a certain function, and cells come together to form tissue. So in this picture, we have nervous tissue, which is composed of neurons, the cell, and other cell types of the nervous tissue. And then they have a function, which is to transmit electrical and chemical signals. Tissues go together to form an organ. So organs such as the brain, the heart, are usually composed of multiple types of tissue. So for example, the brain has nervous tissue. It also has adipose fat tissue. It has connective tissue. And the brain does a certain function. Plants, right? On the right, we can't forget about plants. Plants are living things. They also have tissues, right? This is the leaves, right? Have a cuticle with a waxy covering. Then they have their mesophyll with photosynthetic cells. So they perform the function of capturing sunlight. From there, organs come together to form an organ system. So in this case, it's the nervous system, the brain, right? The spinal cord, all of the nerves that run out of the spinal cord to the periphery of the body. In the plant, you have the leaves and the shoot, and the branches form the shoot system. So nervous systems perform a certain function in the body. Nervous system responds to the external and internal environment. And if we put the different systems of the organism together, we get the whole organism. So humans have respiratory, nervous system, reproductive system, endocrine system. Those all come together to form us. All the systems in the tree come together to form the tree. So in addition to being organized, living things also must obtain energy. They need a constant source of energy. And energy is required to maintain those levels of organization. So without energy, those atoms that are held together in covalent bonds to make the molecules, which then make up the cell, would kind of come apart over time. They would stop working. The reactions that hold those together wouldn't function anymore without a constant input of energy. And so all living things need energy to maintain the hierarchy of organization. The sun is the ultimate source of energy on the earth. So here's a little flow chart that's showing you that the ultimate source of energy comes from sunlight. Animals such as us cannot use the sunlight directly. So there are types of organisms called producers that can utilize the energy from the sun and convert it to chemical energy, to molecules that then consumers such as humans eat, right? So the energy is flowing from the sun to the consumer, to the producers, those photosynthetic organisms, to the consumers, and which each of those transfers, some is energy is lost, right? Then the consumers decompose, and organisms referred to as decomposers, such as bacteria, such as fungi, such as earthworms, will take the energy from that dead or decaying matter, and then those chemicals cycle back into the earth and go back to the atmosphere. So we say energy flows through and the chemicals cycle. Okay, so we've talked about living things being organized. We've talked about living things requiring energy. Now we're going to say that living organisms also have to maintain what is referred to as homeostasis. Homeostasis is sometimes called just balance, or steady state is actually what it means. And so organisms must maintain their internal environment within a certain range in order to live. And so when we talk about what internal environment factors we're discussing, we can say temperature, right? Humans, our internal temperature is roughly 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. We can't really deviate too much from that, or else we'll get in trouble. If our internal environment starts to get too cold, right, then all the reactions that keep our body functioning won't work. The same thing, if we get too hot, then the proteins that facilitate those reactions will start to not be able to function anymore. Also water, we need a certain water and salt balance, right? That's what our kidneys do, and our urine secretes salts and other things that will not allow our body to stay within that range. So homeostasis is the idea of keeping the internal variables in a certain framework, in a certain boundaries. And then in addition to that, our body has to be able, living things have to be able to respond to their environment. So most organisms do this by movement, right? If an animal is in fear, if a predator is chasing them, they will run away. Living things do this. They respond to their environment. If a plant needs to grow, it grows towards sunlight to obtain energy. That's a movement. So even fungi have little structures underground that grow towards dead matter and decompose it. So organisms often respond to their environment by movement. So they maintain homeostasis, they respond to their environment. Living organisms also must be able to reproduce in order to keep the organism population over time. So reproduction is the production of a new organism, and this varies how they do it. Bacteria can reproduce without a partner. They kind of just split into two and make clones of themselves. Humans reproduce sexually with the union of an egg and a sperm. So organisms and living things must be able to reproduce. How reproduction occurs varies. Every organisms have evolved form of reproduction that works for them. And in addition to reproduction, living things must be able to develop. So it's one thing to join an egg and a sperm and make a single-celled zygote, right? That's that first cell that is produced from the joining of an egg and a sperm. But then that cell must be able to divide and differentiate into the different types of cells and different organs and organ systems. So that's what we mean by develop. There's no good that comes of it if an organism can reproduce but not develop. So living things must be able to do both. Organisms also have adaptations that allow them to survive in their particular environment. So for example, I like giving examples instead of just definitions. So if an adaptation is something that allows an organism to survive in their environment, humans, what are humans' adaptations? Our brain. Our brain has allowed us to learn how to grow food over time and transmit that knowledge to our young. It has allowed us to know how to make housing that allows us to survive in harsh environments year-round, right? Our brain has allowed us to have medical knowledge to help cure illness and help mothers give birth, right, without dying. So I would say the best adaptations humans have is our brain, right? Other organisms, let's say an oak tree. An oak tree is one of the tallest trees that can grow up high above all other plants. So their leaves can capture the sunlight. So their adaptation is that they can have this tree trunk that will continuously grow, and these stems that will reach out into the sky to capture sunlight. So adaptations are a modification that allows that organism to survive in an environment. So every organism has different adaptations. And organisms really get their adaptations through the process of evolution. So over time, we're going to talk about this in our next video lecture. Over time, organisms evolve adaptations that allow them to survive in a particular environment. Here is, just to end off, a picture of these penguins. We talked about humans, trees. Here's penguins, right? What are the adaptations of penguins? Well, they have these very dense feathers that are waterproof. They have like this oil on them. So even in the water, they're not really absorbing the water and getting wet. They also have a lot of fat, a lot of adipose or blubber inside of them. That helps them stay buoyant in the water, and that also insulates their organs because they live in this harsh, cold environment. They have these fins that are, the bones are really flat, and these fins are great paddles in the water that can move them around. Their feet are really connected to their body to streamline their body in the water. So they have all of these adaptations that have evolved over time to allow them to successfully live, reproduce in this harsh environment. Okay, so if we, just before we finish, I want you to realize